Hello everyone, and welcome back. Before we start, I want to remind you that most of you watch our videos without subscribing. Please subscribe to the channel and give us a like if you enjoy our episodes. Also, let us know in the comments what scary story topics you'd like to see in the future. Now, let's get comfy, relax, and begin. I met Tom on Tinder in October 2017. He seemed like my type, tall and thin, very soft-looking. It's hard to find many gay guys like him in a small town in Nebraska, so I swiped right. We started chatting and soon set up a date. Everything was great for the first couple of months until my roommates moved out at the end of the semester. That's when he came to stay with me for winter break. When I wanted to spend more time with my family for Christmas, Tom told me he couldn't go home because he had cut ties with his family. This was a big warning sign for me, but I decided to help him find a place to stay and then break up with him. I didn't want to make him homeless. By the time the break ended, Tom had enrolled at my college and was staying across the hall from me. I knew it would be awkward to break up, but I wasn't ready for what came next. When the new semester began, he knocked on my door, saying he couldn't sleep in his room because he was scared his roommates would kill him. I told him those were just silly thoughts and sent him back. Not an hour later, Tom came back, threatening to kill himself. I took him to the hospital, with him crying about how I was going to break up with him the whole time. I had never told him I was going to. The next morning, I got 30 phone calls. I changed my number and blocked him on all social apps. Then he made a new account and convinced me to meet him to talk. I took him back because, even though he was on meds, he was still unstable. He had tried to kill himself after he was released from the hospital. By then, I had moved off campus. Fast forward 3 months, and now he's moved off campus into an apartment he can't afford. He was basically living with me since he couldn't stay at his new place without trying to kill himself. At that point, I was stuck in a relationship with Tom because I was scared to be the cause of someone's suicide. One night, I decided I didn't care anymore and broke up with him. This is where it gets dark. For an hour, we argued, me begging through my tears for him not to kill himself, and him trying to force me out of his house so he could do it. He threatened to call the police and tell them I was crazy and threatening him. I left and called the police, and when they arrived, they found him trying to blow up his whole apartment building. After he got back, the real stalking began. I started getting up to 50 calls a day from numbers that would change. He was changing his number to get around my call block. His attempts to get me to talk to him were just like before. He made several profiles under different names on social apps to contact me, leaving just enough clues for me to know it was him. His insistence that he wasn't going to hurt me crossed the line from creepy to almost threatening, like a come out, wherever you are kind of thing, all while he tried to get me alone in a room with him. I left my home and moved in with my aunt, 20 miles away. One night at 10:30 p.m., I got a call from the police. They said my apartment was broken into and I needed to check for missing things. He had pretended to be me to get a locksmith to open my door. The drive back was through one of the worst lightning storms I had ever seen. When I got there, I had a friend and a baseball bat with me. I opened the door and saw that nothing was missing. Instead, new things were there, things I didn't recognize. I opened my bedroom door and found Tom's phone on the charger. My bed had no sheets. Turning to the window, I saw Tom's clothes in a pile. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I knew he was right behind me. When I turned around, he was in my closet, crouched and naked. He had a wild look in his eyes, but came out calmly, like a zombie, pale with dark circles around his eyes. I waved the bat at him, but he seemed ready to die. He asked me to kill him. He tried to take the bat from me. He tried to prove he lived in my apartment legally. He told me he had given me HIV. I got him into the living room and made him get dressed before the cops arrived. He lunged at me, and the police tackled him. It was the most violent arrest I had ever seen. No amount of tasing calmed him down. He screamed, "Police brutality! I just want to talk to Jake. Why won't you let me talk to Jake? Give me 5 minutes alone with him." The stalking continued after he posted bail. The next day, he knocked on my door pretending to be the police. He found me in class and chased me, grabbing me before I pepper sprayed him. He tried to break into my house again. He was arrested again for trespassing. I got a protective order after he posted bail the second time. But that didn't stop him. He kept calling. I finished the semester and moved back home, reporting every time he broke the order, which was often. He left for LA because he thinks the order is only valid in our state. If he comes back or gets arrested in California, I'll take him to court. Ta-da! Jake pulled his hands away from my eyes, and I saw the place for the first time. Wow, I said, trying to sound happy. I didn't want my husband to hear how let down I felt. The place was big, like he said, but it was also old and dirty. The paint was coming off, and some of the shutters were missing. The whole house looked sad and broken. This wasn't where I wanted to live forever. Jake called it a fixer-upper, but that was an understatement. This place needed to be torn down. "So you like it?" he asked. "I love it." I knew how he wanted me to react and how much this moment meant to him. Together we walked over the dead grass, up the broken porch steps, and into a house that made me want to run away. The inside was just as bad, with missing floor tiles and a musty smell, like something had died in the walls. This was our new home, but the only thing new were the flies that came in with us. That's how Jake and I moved into the house on Oak Street. We unpacked our boxes that same day, and Jake went to work the day after, leaving me alone with the dust and frustration. For the first week, I spent almost all my time cleaning surfaces and making a list of everything that needed to be replaced. I woke up, worked, and ended my day with a lukewarm shower in brownish water. Every day Jake would come home from the office, stressed from his new job, and ask me how my day was. I always hid my sadness and told him I was fine, and loved the house he picked for us. The days were terrible, but the nights were worse. After the sun set behind the mountains, the house began to make noises, creaks, groans, and other sounds Jake called settling. The house was settling. We were too. On those long nights while Jake snored, I lay in bed and tried to ignore the noises around me. I took sleeping pills, more than I should have, and that worked for a while. But after a week, I couldn't sleep at all. The noises were getting worse. They were changing too. What started as minor creaks and groans turned into louder noises, banging, thuds, and worst of all, whispering. At first I thought it was all in my tired mind, but I knew I wasn't crazy. There was actual whispering coming from the walls, unclear voices sometimes broken by giggles. Several times I woke Jake from his deep sleep, but as soon as I did, the whispering stopped. It was like the house wanted to scare me and only me. Each time Jake got more annoyed, thinking I was making up problems with his perfect home. After a few nights, I gave up completely. He'd never hear the voices, and he'd never believe me. After 2 weeks of no sleep and constant fear, I had enough. The whispering had grown louder, the voices more bold. I had to figure this out myself. I pushed myself out of bed, careful not to wake Jake and make him angry. I crept out of the room and into the long, dark hallway. Aside from the creaking floorboards under my bare feet, I had to be silent. I had to follow the whispers to see where they were coming from. I passed the bathroom where the shower dripped in time with my heartbeat. I passed the guest bedroom, which was deathly quiet, and then the living room. When I got to the kitchen, I knew I had found the source of the whispering. I was close enough to hear individual words. They said, "Remove the wife." These voices were talking about my husband and me. They were laughing too, cold and mocking. I pushed open the kitchen door, expecting to find nothing. After all, these were just voices. They couldn't be real. The kitchen windows were covered, so it took a moment for my eyes to adjust to the dark. But when they did, I gasped in horror. There, crouched near the table, were two figures. One was male, and the other female. They were bent low, tearing apart a loaf of bread on the floor between them. They noticed me right away. I couldn't see their faces in the dark, but I saw their heads turn towards me. I was too scared to move, too scared to run. The figures didn't move for a long moment. They just waited in the dark until the man whispered something to the woman. The woman whispered back. They seemed to be arguing. Then the man stood up. He was thin and frail, but impossibly tall. He walked towards me, and before I could react, he grabbed my shoulders and lowered his face until it was inches from mine. "This is a nightmare," he whispered. "You're asleep." Then he pushed me backward, out of the kitchen. He slammed the door behind him. That was when I screamed. It took that long for my senses to return. I screamed louder than I ever had before, and in seconds, Jake ran to me from the bedroom. "What's wrong?" he asked. I couldn't speak. No sounds would come out. All I could do was point one shaky finger toward the kitchen door. He angrily pushed it open and charged into the kitchen. I wanted to stop him, but I just couldn't. Then he called my name. "Emma, come here now." I held my breath and followed him into the dark room. He turned on the light, and the kitchen was completely empty. By then, my heartbeat had slowed, and I could speak. "People," I said. "There were people in here." He spread his arms wide and gestured all around him. "Yeah? Well, they're not here now," Jake snapped. "Jesus Christ, Emma! Do you hate our new house so much that you have to ruin my sleep with some hallucination?" He was right. There were no intruders. I looked at the floor where the figures had been crouching. "Jake," I said, "look at the crumbs." The tiles were covered with bright crumbs. "So? You must have missed a spot when you were sweeping." Finally, I snapped. I was done being scared. I was done hiding my feelings. "I hate this house, Jake," I shouted. It was the first time I ever shouted at my husband. "It's terrible, and there are things here, and I'm tired of you pretending everything is perfect. It's not, and I must move out right now." Before Jake could answer, I heard a giggle coming from the half-open pantry. Fear took over my anger, and my heart was now filled with both fear and anger. Jake's expression softened. He heard it too. Finally, he started walking toward the pantry. "Don't," I told him. He ignored me, pulled open the pantry, and turned on the light. I stepped forward carefully, feeling the crumbs under my bare feet. I looked over Jake's shoulder into the pantry. It was empty, just shelves of spices and canned food. My heart sank. Then Jake leaned forward and pushed some of the cans to the side, revealing a small opening in the wall behind the shelves. I'd never seen that before, even though it was big enough for an adult to crawl through. He leaned his face toward the opening and shouted, "Whoever you are, get out here now." Inside the darkness, there was some rustling and then silence. Slowly, very slowly, the man and woman crawled into the light. They were covered in dust, their clothes torn and dirty, and they smelled like mold and filth. I glanced at Jake to make sure he saw what I saw, and he did. He glared at the intruders. "Who are you?" he asked. The man answered, "The bank took everything away, but we couldn't leave. This house is ours." "You've been living in the walls?" I asked. The woman looked away, but the man's dark eyes locked onto mine. He stared me down. "This is our house," he said again. Jake told me to get my phone and call the police. Then he turned back towards the couple and screamed at them. "We bought this fair and square. If you don't leave us alone, we're going to—" I interrupted my husband. "No," I said. "I'm done." I turned and walked straight out the front door. I got in my car and drove to a hotel. The house on Oak Street was ours. It was what Jake had chosen for us, but I refused to set foot in it ever again. I'd finally had enough. I'm a cow farmer in the Midwest. It's not the best job, but it pays the bills. These days, finding a job with good pay is tough, so I've learned to appreciate it. The job means cleaning up after the cows, checking their hooves, milking, and helping them give birth when needed. It's messy work, but I've gotten used to it. I don't even smell the stink anymore like I did when I first started. It used to be almost unbearable, but now, it's nothing. The farm was my father's before me and his father's before him. The story I'm about to tell you is my dad's. He told it to me when I first started working here as a kind of warning, a what not to do on the farm. He's long gone now, God rest his soul, but his story has haunted me for years. I figured I'd let others hear it and judge it for themselves. This was back in the 60s when Dad was in his early 20s. He worked on the farm with his father, Bill, at the time. He hated it. He hated the stench that got worse in the summer, and cleaning up after the cows was the worst part. The cows stayed in a huge barn, more like a big warehouse, where they were fed and kept at night. They grazed during the day, and at night they would poop on the concrete floor beneath them. In the morning, when the cows went out to graze, my dad would use a long hose to spray the droppings to the end of the building and down a shaft into a big tank below the barn. The tank would fill with the waste, and once a week, a guy would come by to empty it. It was really nasty work, but my dad did it anyway. My grandfather decided it was too much work for just him and my dad, so they decided to hire another farmhand. They didn't get anyone interested in the job for the first few weeks until they met a man at a local feed store named Sam. He was in his late 20s and eager to work. He hadn't had a job in years and needed the money because his wife was pregnant with their first child. My grandfather hired him right there in the feed store, and by the next day, Sam was on the farm, working harder than anyone my dad had ever seen. He was determined and very ambitious. He was always running around the farm, fixing things that needed fixing and trying to learn everything they did. He loved the job and told everyone he just wanted to be good at what he was being paid to do. He believed in honest work and that people should earn their pay. My dad liked having Sam around, not just because he worked hard, but also because he was gullible and easy to manipulate. My dad had tasks given to him by my grandpa throughout the day, and each time he was told to do something, he passed the task along to Sam. Sam didn't mind because he didn't know any better, and my dad didn't care because it meant less work for him. About 4 months went by with Sam doing most of the work around the farm, and my dad even started to find it funny that Sam would do whatever he was told without question. He was happy to do it. One hot summer morning, the cows had just gone out to graze, and my grandpa told my dad to spray the droppings down the shaft at the end of the barn like he usually did. My dad then passed the job along to Sam and sat by the side of the barn to have a smoke. When Sam was done, he came outside to tell my dad he had an idea that he thought would help the farm. He told my dad that if they emptied the tank below the barn themselves, they could use the cow droppings as manure in the fields. The manure would fertilize the plants and make them grow bigger and faster. At first, my dad thought the idea was stupid, but then he figured it would be funny to see if Sam would actually try to empty the tank. So he agreed. He didn't tell my grandpa because he knew he would never approve, and he just wanted to see how it would play out. He showed Sam where the release valve was to empty the tank into the big barrels. He told him to be very careful and not to turn the valve too fast. Otherwise, the line would get clogged, and they'd have to call someone to fix it. My dad then left Sam alone to do what he had planned and decided to take a walk around the barn to check the gates and make sure everything was in order. What my dad didn't know at the time was that Sam would end up turning the valve too fast, and the line would get clogged. Sam then opened the tank from above and reached a pole into the sludge to try and dislodge whatever was blocking the line. My dad heard screaming coming from inside the barn and rushed over to see what was wrong. He made his way down into the tank and was horrified by what he found. Sam had fallen into the huge 5,000-gallon tank that hadn't been emptied for a week and was now drowning in the thick feces, desperately reaching out for help. By the time my dad got to the top of the ladder and looked into the tank, all he could see was Sam's hand poking out of the brown goo. He grabbed onto it and tried pulling him out, but he had no leverage on the top of that tank. He managed to pull Sam up long enough for him to tell my dad that he was just trying to fix it himself, since he knew they would have to pay someone for his mistake. He felt bad, and my dad reassured him everything would be okay, and to just hold on. Then, Sam's grip failed, and he plunged back under the thick excrement once again. This time, no part of Sam's body was visible to grab and possibly rescue him. My dad had no idea what to do, so he ran across the farm as fast as he could to get my grandpa, who immediately called the police. By the time they made it back to the tank, Sam's hand had disappeared under the sludge, and there was nothing my dad and grandpa could do but wait. The police showed up with firemen, and they didn't know much of what to do either. They ended up reaching a metal pole down into the tank with a sort of loop on the end, and when they pulled Sam out, it was very clear that he had passed. My dad was horrified and felt like it was his fault. He knew it was a bad idea but thought it would be funny. He could have stopped Sam, but his own arrogance let him do it. Sam's wife became a widow and never remarried. She named their son after him and eventually moved out of town. My dad made a point to work as hard as Sam did every day for the rest of his life, in honor of the man whose death he felt he was responsible for. My dad passed away in 2018, and the last thing he said to me was to never take advantage of someone's hard work. Last summer, I tried Tinder for the first time. I still didn't feel comfortable using an app to meet strangers, but all my friends swore by it. My sister Sophie even found her fiancé through Tinder. I wasn't looking for a fiancé, of course. I just wanted to meet someone and have a nice, regular one-night stand. I found a pretty handsome blonde guy who didn't live too far. His name was Adam, and he liked my photo. That's pretty much all I needed to know. I went over to his apartment, and we had a pretty okay time. Afterwards, he went to take a shower, and I left without saying goodbye. I got the feeling that he wanted me to stay over for the rest of the night, but I was not interested. The next day, he called me at work to ask why I left without telling him. I had no idea how he got my number. We never exchanged personal information, and besides, it definitely crossed the boundary. I told him to stay away from me and hung up. That evening, when I was leaving work, I saw him standing at the edge of the parking lot. At first, I couldn't tell if it was him. He just stood there in the dark. But once I got in my car and drove off, I could see his face, and it was definitely Adam. When I got home, I told all my neighbors to be on the lookout for a tall, blonde man who might try to sneak around my house. I thought about calling the police, but I've heard horror stories about people with stalkers, and the police usually don't help much. For the next week, I was really on edge. Aside from some muddy footprints right outside my bedroom window, there was no sign of Adam. I knew he was still out there, but I never caught a glimpse of him. My friends came over one night, and they all told me that I was acting jumpy. They were worried about me. My best friend Trevor said I needed to start going out again. I needed to stop thinking about Adam. I said I wasn't ready, but he grabbed my phone off the end table and opened it up to Tinder. "I'm going to find you someone to get your mind off of Adam." I tried to wrestle my phone out of his hands, but he kept scrolling through potential hookups. Then he stopped and handed me back the phone. "What about this guy?" I was looking at one of the hottest profile pictures I'd ever seen. Greg. This guy was gorgeous, and all his information seemed tailor-made for my interests. He was like the perfect guy. I figured that my friends were right. I needed to get on with my life. So an hour later, I found myself outside his address. It was a cozy little house in an upscale neighborhood. I knocked on the door, forcing myself to stop being nervous as I waited for Greg to answer. But Greg didn't answer. Adam did. He grabbed me, pulled me into the house, and slammed the door shut behind me. When it was just the two of us in the house, he pulled out a knife. "Hi, I'm Greg. What's wrong with you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Nothing," he explained, making sure he stood between me and the door. "I'd just like to have a good time. I meet women for a fun night at my place, and when we're done, I love to collect. But when you ran off like you did, I was devastated. I never got to the best part." "So you decided to try again? And what's the best part?" I asked. "You made up a fake profile and what? You rented a house?" "Some people own multiple properties," he said. "Don't worry about it." I could tell that there was something he wasn't telling me. I glanced around the living room and saw photos on the wall. They showed a happy family, a husband, wife, and 2 young boys. Adam, or Greg, or whoever he was the father. That meant this was his house, and he had a family. I used that information to my advantage. "But what if your wife comes home?" I asked. "Don't worry," he said. "We have plenty of time for ourselves." Then he lunged at me. He moved so fast I couldn't dodge. He tackled me to the floor and pinned me down. Then he tied me up to a chair. "I will collect now!" Adam roared. He casually walked over to a dresser where he pulled out a trimmer. What was he going to do? With cold precision, Adam began to trim my hair. The pain and terror were unbearable, and I couldn't help but weep. He gathered my tears in a jar, his satisfaction growing with every drop. As the jar filled, I felt a sinking realization that my life was in grave danger. Suddenly, the front door creaked open, and to my relief, his wife entered the house. She wore a sinister smile that sent shivers down my spine. I soon learned that she was just as deranged as her husband, if not more. Seeing me tied to the chair seemed to amuse her, and she wasted no time in joining the twisted ritual. With a wicked grin, she took the trimmer from Adam's hand and approached me. I begged for mercy, but it was as if I had entered a realm of madness where compassion held no place. The wife began to trim my hair with cruel delight, matching her husband's unsettling composure. I cried in agony, but my pleas fell on deaf ears. In a sickening display of sadism, they both collected my tears in separate jars, competing as if it were some twisted game. The pain, fear, and humiliation were overwhelming, pushing me to the brink of collapse. It was a living nightmare I couldn't wake up from. We got what we wanted. We should leave now, Adam said. They left me tied to the chair. As the hours ticked by, my horror only deepened, knowing there was no rescue in sight. After 5 hours, I somehow managed to untie myself. It was raining outside, but my eyes were completely dry. It's been 2 months since that horrifying encounter. I know that it will forever send shivers down my spine. I can't help but remember the whole ordeal whenever I cry. Tell me, my friends, should I seek therapy? Should I go to the cops? What should I do? Daniel was nice. Who am I kidding? Daniel was great. Pale green eyes and dark brown hair, perfectly chiseled body. Oof. After 3 weeks of letdowns, I could tell Daniel was going to be one of the better ones. From the start, he had the hotel booked and ready. How sweet of him. I love these straight-to-the-point guys, the ones that don't expect any of that relationship stuff. Who has time anyway these days? I met Daniel on Tinder just a few hours ago. After scrolling all evening without finding anyone interesting, his profile caught my eye. Bit of a last-minute arrangement, if you ask me. But you know what they say. Spur-of-the-moment decisions are some of the best ones. His phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. "Ah, sorry about that," he said. His phone screen showed an unknown caller ID. Great. "Do you mind if I pick up? Could be someone from work," he asked politely. "Yeah, of course. Not like I'm going anywhere tonight," I said with a wink, hoping he'd finish the call quickly. Daniel gave me a sexy smirk and picked up the phone. "Hello? You look confused. Who's this? I think you have the wrong person here." He started pacing around the room with a worried look on his face. I could faintly hear a woman's voice on the other end. A secret lover? Maybe he's got a whole other identity and is married with kids. That wouldn't be a first. You never can tell with these guys you meet online. "Yes, I'm Daniel Walton, but I'm telling you I haven't taken a loan, much less one of that amount. You have the wrong number." He sat down on the edge of the bed. I raised an eyebrow and mouthed, "Is everything okay?" He nodded, but I could tell things weren't okay. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. Daniel went pale. "I'm telling you I don't know anything about a debt. It's not mine. You have the wrong guy. Leave me alone or I swear I'll—" He screamed into the phone and immediately got hung up on. Now I was getting worried. Did I misjudge him? What sort of illegal thing is this guy into? Daniel looked me in the eye and said, "Look, Julia, that was some crazy lady rambling about debts that I need to pay tonight. She said that if I didn't do it willingly, her men would make sure that I do. So I think we're going to have to make a run for it." "What?" I asked, confused about the whole thing. "I have no idea what debt she's—" "Daniel Walton, open up!" shouted a man on the other side of the door. "Damn it, that has to be them now," Daniel said. "Well, what do we do?" I asked again. Daniel looked around the room and locked his eyes on the window. We were on the 6th floor, but there was a fire escape outside. The men kept banging on the door. He didn't have to explain. He quickly crossed the room and tried to open the window. It was bolted shut. We could hear the men working on the locks, trying to break in. I looked around and saw a heavy desk lamp. I tossed it to Daniel. He caught it and threw it at the window, shattering the glass. "Freeze!" Too late. The men had broken through the door. They held us at gunpoint. There were two of them, wearing cheap black and white suits. One of them spoke. "Daniel Walton, I trust Madam has explained your circumstances. We require your outstanding debt of $500,000 paid in full tonight." We both had our hands up. Daniel looked terrified. He stuttered. "I don't know anything about such a debt. It's not mine. You've got the wrong guy. Please." The men moved closer, guns aimed at him. Daniel was getting desperate. "Please," he begged. The same man spoke again. "Sir, if you're unable to pay us in full tonight, we are at liberty to take any one of your organs to cover the debt." Then Daniel looked at me. He had an idea. "They don't have to be mine, right?" Locking eyes with me, he asked. "The organs, they don't have to be mine." I sighed. It always came down to this. I thought at least cute little Daniel Walton here would hold up for a few hours, but no, he's weak like everyone else. "All right, boys, that's enough. Wrap him up." Daniel's eyes went wide. He was about to face the men when a bullet hit him square on the forehead. The other guy had fired his gun, the noise muffled by a silencer. Wasn't a bad kill at all, on point, exactly what we needed. "Remind me to recommend you to my uncle, okay?" I whispered into his ear while he knelt over Daniel's dead body. "Yes, ma'am," he replied as he helped carry Daniel's body to the bathroom. "Oh, and Malta said she would like a word with you, ma'am." "Of course she does." I rolled my eyes and threw myself on the bed. That was a complete bummer. He didn't even last 5 minutes. Daniel's phone rang again. The men handed it to me, and sure enough, Malta was on the other end. "Calling to revel in my misery, is it?" I asked, staring at the ceiling. "Oh, come on. Did you really think that guy would last more than 5 minutes? Money laundering, aiding and abetting human trafficking? You can't be serious, right, Talon?" "Oh, I don't know, Malta. Maybe I'm just getting old and soft." "Well, either way, you lost the bet, so family dinner's on you tonight." I sighed. All right. What do you want?" I could hear her clicking a pen. "You remember that place at the corner of Chinatown near the butcher's?" Not sure. Is it above our old lab from all those years ago?" "Yeah, that one. They love that Peking duck place, no? We should get something nice tonight, with all the trouble he's going through with the synthetic substance guys." "Of course. Anything for you and the family, Malta." This happened in the late 1990s, not long after I finished high school. Let me give you some backstory first. I met this guy when I was about 14 or 15. He was older than me. I never knew his real age because he often lied about it, but he was at least a few years older. He became my off-and-on summer fling for a few years. Nothing serious. When I was a senior in high school, we reconnected one winter night, and he asked me to be his girlfriend. I liked him a lot, so we started dating full-time. He was sweet. I missed most of the red flags, like him worrying about all the other guys noticing me if I wore a dress or something. After my 18th birthday, we moved in together. I was still in high school and had an after-school job, so I thought I could handle it. Plus, I thought he would be a helpful life partner, and we could build a life together. I was wrong. I graduated high school and got 2 jobs, while he kept quitting any job he had. I was also preparing to go to a local college. I was determined to do it all. After about a year of this and some really crazy fights that became physical, I ended up just becoming numb to the life I was living. By physical, I mean he was abusive. Between the physical and mental abuse, he wore me down. I knew I deserved better. I knew he was lying every time he told me he would never hurt me again. I also believed him when he said he would kill me and not think twice about it. I won't tell every single time he beat me, but there was one time I truly thought he was going to murder me. I had been at home with our baby boy while he was out with friends or doing whatever he was doing. It was a pretty good night. I enjoyed being a new mom and liked the time away from him. It was relaxing. I'll refer to him as the asshole. The asshole came home later that winter night and brought a friend with him. I knew the friend, but not too well. They came into the house and everything seemed to be okay. but I noticed that the asshole was being a little sarcastic with his tone towards me. I tried to ignore it and just focus on our baby. The asshole and his friend sat in the living room, drinking and talking. I stayed in the bedroom, hoping they would leave me alone. But after a while, the asshole came into the bedroom and started accusing me of things I hadn't done. His voice got louder, and I could see the anger in his eyes. I knew what was coming. He grabbed me by the arm and dragged me into the living room. His friend watched, not saying a word. The asshole started yelling at me, calling me names, and then he hit me. The first punch made me see stars. I fell to the floor, holding my face. The baby started crying in the other room. The asshole didn't care. He kept hitting me, kicking me while I was down. I thought I was going to die right there. Finally, his friend stepped in and pulled him off me. "That's enough, man," he said. The asshole shoved him away but stopped hitting me. I crawled to the bedroom, picked up my crying baby and held him close. I was shaking all over, but I knew I had to stay strong for my baby. I knew I had to get out of there, but I didn't know how. All I knew was that I couldn't let the asshole kill me, not with my baby watching. It was a fake nice and sarcasm. They usually came before he wanted to start a fight. I then prepared for him to start arguing. I thought that his friend being there would be a safety net of some sort. Boy, was I wrong. I made sure not to do anything to make him mad. I stayed close to my little boy and let him and his friend just hang out, talk, and drink. I couldn't pinpoint exactly what caused him to snap that night, but he did. It was the worst I had ever seen him. He wanted to fight me. He screamed in my face that he was going to beat me like a man, all while I was holding our baby. His friend followed him, or at least stayed nearby. I tried to run, but he blocked me before I could get away. He told me he was going to kill me. I saw his friend just standing there, panicked. I handed him my baby and said, "Please don't let anything happen to him." The moment my baby was in his friend's arms, I felt my hair being ripped out of my head. Asshole began kicking and hitting me. I got away long enough to make it to the living room where our landline phone was. I dialed 911, and just as I hit the last number, he picked me up and slammed me down on the ground. He slammed the phone down to hang it up and then cracked me on the face with it. I thought for sure that the 911 call didn't go through. He began hitting me so hard and choking me that I was blacking out and seeing stars as my head spun. I looked at his friend and begged him to get help. He just stood there, scared to death. Asshole then told him if he did, he would kill him. I understood in that moment that his friend was truly just as scared and didn't know what to do. I wasn't mad at him for not helping. I was just really thankful that he was protecting my baby. I knew this was going to be it. Asshole was going to kill me like he often said he would. He would have no remorse, just as he promised. I wasn't about to make this easy on him. I fought back harder than I ever had before. He was on something, which I later found out, so his strength was definitely not something I could match. Not to mention he was about 100 pounds bigger than me. But I was a mom who wanted to live to see my baby grow up. As he hovered over me, hitting me in the head and choking me, I grabbed his balls and twisted and pulled. It didn't faze him. He was so high. I was tasting blood and feeling so numb. He was beating me so bad that I wasn't even hurting anymore. Maybe it was the adrenaline in the moment. I don't know, but suddenly the hits stopped. I no longer felt my head getting bashed in, but weirdly enough, I heard a pounding. He got off of me, and for a split second I didn't know what was happening. I wasn't even sure if I was still alive at this point. Finally, I stood up as he told me to be quiet. The pounding was the police knocking on our door. The 911 call had been an open call, and the entire fight was heard. Asshole answered the door, and he told me to stay back. He started to tell the police some story about the baby just crying. I stepped into view of the officer, who looked at me, and he immediately threw Asshole against the outside of our home. The rest seemed to happen so fast. Asshole was being arrested, and an officer was talking to me and taking my statement. One of the cops told me then that I had one of the worst injuries he had ever seen a person have and still be alive. Asshole had hurt me so badly that he had beat a hole into my lip where I couldn't even have a drink without the water going through. He called me from jail, and the exact words he said to me were, "Why did you do this?" He really wasn't even sorry at all. He didn't even lie to me this time and pretend that he was. I left him. He was eventually sentenced to 26 days in jail. He never served them because he moved to another state before he could be arrested. He managed to find me and stalk me, but I stayed strong and stayed away from him. Eventually, he moved on to his next target. I have truly felt so much guilt over this, but the next woman was beaten and choked too. But she wasn't just beaten. She was also choked to death. He took the life of someone, and I'm sure he thought nothing of it, just as he always said to me. I know deep in my heart that if I hadn't walked away, it would have been me he killed. But I'm so sorry to that woman's family. He's in prison now, probably feeling no remorse at all. But hopefully, he's getting justice served to him in other ways. I'm just so glad that I actually got away from him. Around March of 2014, I started talking to this girl on Tinder. She seemed cool and fun, and after about a week of talking, she suggested we meet up in person. She invited me to a coffee shop, and I accepted. However, on the day we were supposed to meet, she started messaging me, saying she had something to tell me. Her pictures on Tinder weren't actually of her, and yes, she was a guy. He claimed that he really liked talking to me though, and begged me to still meet up with him. Naturally, I declined. I blocked his profile and moved on with my life. About a week later, I started talking to another girl. Once again, she seemed cool and fun, and we hit it off right away. She asked me if I spoke to other people on Tinder often, and rather stupidly, I told her about my previous encounter with the guy pretending to be a girl. Weeks later, I would realize that this new girl was the same person as the week before. She asked me if I wanted to meet up, and I said sure as long as it was in a public place. We decided on a cafe, and the next day I sat at the table waiting. 5, then 10, then 15 minutes passed, and she was nowhere to be found. I peered out of the window and saw a man across the street, staring at me intently. I looked away, waited a few seconds, and looked back. But he was still there, just standing and staring. At that point, I left the cafe, got on my bike, and rushed home. I was definitely a little freaked out, but tried to calm myself, thinking no one could have followed me. I deleted my Tinder profile, and things were normal for a few weeks. About 3 weeks later, I started getting phone calls. The numbers always showed up as unknown. I picked up the first few times to hear some guy breathing heavily into the phone. I was already a little scared. After about a day, I stopped picking up any call unless it displayed the caller's name. Then I started receiving texts. At first, they were pretty harmless. Calls for attention, begging me to meet them in person. Then the texts changed to very sexual messages, until eventually the messages became threatening. The person started mentioning my family and friends' names and their locations, saying they would get them involved unless I answered. Because they were texting me, I could see a displayed number, but when I called phone providers, they told me the number couldn't be traced and that it was likely a track phone. Great. I waited about 2 weeks, not responding to the texts, thinking I shouldn't feed the troll, but it just became too much. I started getting upwards of 50 texts and phone calls a day. I would wake up to 10 or 20 texts every morning. I then decided to change my number altogether. The texts and calls stopped for a while, but sure enough, they started happening again. I called my phone provider, asking if they ever gave out numbers at a user's request, and they said their policy stated that they wouldn't and couldn't unless a valid identification was provided. Then one day, I tried logging into my Facebook, but was somehow denied. Within a day, friends started contacting me, asking what the hell I was doing, saying that they were getting terrible messages from my account. One of my girlfriends was receiving messages about her mom who had died years ago. I apologized a lot and told people what was going on. I contacted Facebook and explained the situation, and they helped me access my account again. I deactivated it for a while. Enough was enough at this point. I decided to contact the FBI, explaining what had been going on for over a month. They documented everything, but told me that since I or any of my friends and family were not in immediate danger, they probably wouldn't be able to do anything. At this point, I felt stuck. I thought about hiring a private investigator or a hacker. I decided against it and just hoped it would fade out if I never answered. I left my Facebook deactivated and continued to ignore any texts and phone calls I received. I never had any trouble at home, but some of my closest friends received occasional texts as well, which freaked us all out. I hated that they got dragged into it too. One day, I came home and things felt very eerie. The door was unlocked, windows open, and no one home. A strong breeze was running through the apartment. I checked the place and found nothing else weird, so I locked everything up and waited for my roommates to get home. It's been almost 7 months now, and the calls and texts have more or less stopped. I'll get an occasional text, but at most, one every 2 weeks. At the peak of it, I was receiving almost 100 texts a day. It definitely affected my social and personal life. I became much more wary of the people around me and my surroundings. I felt like I couldn't really focus on anything until this all stopped. Work was difficult, though I tried to maintain my composure as best I could. Everything was just weird. Life was weird. I've since stopped using all forms of dating apps and websites. Things are starting to get back to normal, and I just want to put it all behind me. I'm moving at the end of this year, so it'll be nice to have a fresh start in a new place. I'm not going to say that all dating apps are dangerous and that no one should use them, but definitely cover your bases. Ask more questions before meeting someone. FaceTime them first. Skype. Anything. I was naive about it, and I regret it. Be safe, stick close to your friends, and try to meet people in more traditional ways sometimes. When I signed up for the Tinder app after a lot of persuasion from my friends, I hadn't expected to get a match within the first week. There had been a couple of duds that I had immediately swiped left on, but this one had caught my eye. His profile was fun, and we shared a few interests in movies and books. The picture showed a cute guy taking a selfie with his cat. I was always a sucker for animal lovers, and from his profile alone, he ticked all the right boxes. His name was James, and he was only a year older than me, so when he swiped right on me, I swiped right back. We started talking the same day. I was a little tentative at first since it was my first time using a dating app, and I wanted to make sure there were no red flags. But he was perfect. He was friendly, curious, and showed genuine interest in what I talked about. It felt like we really connected. When I found out he lived in the same city, it felt like fate. We decided to hold off meeting for the moment, but we spoke almost every day. When I woke up, there was always a message waiting for me, saying things like, "Good morning," or "I woke up thinking about you." I never met someone who made me feel special like that. Of course, I wasn't completely gullible. Part of me knew from previous experience that it seemed too good to be true. But when I asked him for pictures to prove he was real, he complied easily, sending me snaps of him and his cat in the moment. It was real. He was real. And I thought I'd found my match. The next step was a phone call. I decided I would know for sure if I could hear his voice, hear a real person talking to me, not just a text message. He agreed, and we decided to call at 7 o'clock the next evening. I was shaking with nervous excitement the whole day, and even my coworker and best friend Laura could feel it. "Oh, what's with you?" she asked once the coffee shop had quieted down after the lunchtime rush. "You look like you're on top of the world." "You remember that guy I've been talking to?" I said, drumming my fingers against the counter. "I can barely stay still. I'm calling him tonight." Laura grinned. "That's great," she said. I nodded, trying to hide my nerves. "I know we're taking things a little slow, but I want to make sure I'm not getting involved with someone, dodgy," I said with a small laugh. "Have you seen pictures of him?" Laura asked, her eyes narrowing slightly. I made sure the cafe was empty before pulling out my phone and bringing up a gallery of all the photos. "Yep. He sends them as soon as I ask, so I know they're real. I know he's real." Laura's eyes lit up. Show me, she said, leaning her head against my shoulder and looking down at my phone. "Aw, he's cute and he has a cat." "I know, and he's so lovely. I really think I found a decent guy." "You know how difficult those are to find these days," I said, rolling my eyes. Laura said nothing. She was still looking at the photos, a small frown between her brows. Something about him seems kind of familiar, she said, her voice pensive. I feel like I've seen him before. I glanced up in surprise. Really? I mean, he does live in the city. Maybe he actually lives pretty close. I looked around the cafe, as though expecting him to suddenly appear, but the place was still empty. Yeah, maybe, Laura said, shrugging. I'm happy for you though, Em. I really am. I grinned and put my phone away as the bell above the door jingled and a new customer came in. I tried to distract my mind for the rest of the day. By the time 7 o'clock rolled around, I was antsy and excited, waiting for James to call. I'd spent the whole day imagining what his voice might sound like and what we would talk about. I never had good experiences with dating in the past, so there was still a shiver of apprehension that something would go wrong. But for the most part, I was certain that James seemed like a great guy. My phone rang with an unknown number dead on 7 p.m. My fingers were trembling as I picked it up and accepted the call. Hello? I said, my heart fluttering. Emma? The voice was unexpected. That's the only way I could describe it. It sounded like it belonged to a young man, but at the same time, there was a strange, breathless quality to it, like it was coming from far away. I heard a soft crackle and the phone line disconnecting, and then someone breathing raggedly. James, are you there? Yeah, sorry, he said, his voice cutting in and out. I'm in a place with bad reception. Oh, don't worry. You can call back later if now isn't a good time. It's fine, he said, his voice almost a whisper. I couldn't help but frown. This isn't quite what I'd been expecting, and it was starting to make me doubt if maybe James wasn't the perfect guy I thought he was. It's really nice to hear your voice, Emma, he continued, his voice having the same static quality. Yeah, you too, I said uncertainly. Was I really talking to James? Hey, how about we call another time? I'm feeling a little tired after work. If you want, he said reluctantly, and after a short back and forth, we decided to hang up and try again another time. When I finally ended the call, I fell back against my bed with a sigh. That hadn't gone the way I'd expected at all, but I didn't want to give up on him completely just because of a phone call. Maybe he really was just in a place with poor reception. We kept talking for a few more days. James apologized for messing up the call and sent me an adorable picture of him with his cat, who I learned was called Misty, to make up for it. Then we decided to meet up. I felt a little weird bypassing the video call stage, but he seemed eager to meet, and despite the phone call, I was also excited. We planned to meet outside an internet cafe in the middle of the city. I had to take a bus there, and when I told Laura where I was going and who I was meeting, she insisted on coming with me just in case he wasn't who he said he was. She camped out in the internet cafe while I waited by the postbox outside, where we had designated the meeting point. I waited there for a good 40 minutes before I realized he had stood me up. That's when I knew that James, the embodiment of my ideal guy, wasn't real. Only it was so much worse than I thought. Psst. I headed inside the cafe where Laura was waiting for me and saw her face take on an ashen tinge as she stared at one of the computer monitors, her fingers scrolling down the mouse. He didn't show up, I said, making her jump. She looked up at me, a strange look on her face. Em? She said slowly, turning the monitor around so that I could take a look. Is this the guy you've been talking to? On the screen was a photo of James, a few years younger than he seemed now. I frowned. Yeah, that's him. Where did you find this? I asked, my voice shaky. Laura swallowed audibly and clicked off the image, taking me to the article where it had been posted. James Ashton, she read out, dies tragically after meeting with a psycho girl on a dating app. I felt my blood rush out of my cheeks, the ground feeling unsteady beneath my feet. Wait, he's dead? Laura nodded, her voice wobbling. Yeah, and he has been the whole time you've been talking to him. As I tried to process this shocking revelation about James, I found myself unable to let go of the mystery. The feeling of being ghosted by a deceased person haunted me for days. I had to know the truth. As I dug deeper into James's background, I discovered a series of disturbing coincidences. Every person who had interacted with James on the dating app had a bizarre encounter, and all of them shared a peculiar connection. They either experienced severe misfortune or met their untimely deaths. I was now convinced that something unnatural was at play, something sinister tied to James's virtual presence. With Laura's help, I delved even further into the matter, only to stumble upon an old, ominous urban legend that mentioned a malevolent spirit called the Digital Spectre. According to the legend, this vengeful entity preyed on the living by posing as deceased individuals on various digital platforms, seeking to bring harm to anyone who engaged with it. I realized that James was nothing but a malevolent ghost, manipulating technology to lure in and harm unsuspecting users. A wave of terror washed over me, but the thought that I had narrowly escaped becoming another victim gave me some composure. But my horror didn't end there. Over the next few days, strange glitches occurred on my laptop and phone. I received cryptic messages from unknown sources, and my mental health started to deteriorate. As days passed, my grip on reality began to crumble. I could hardly leave the safety of my home. With the unnatural power involved, how could I trust anybody? The lines between the real world and the digital realm blurred completely for me. I stopped eating and drinking. With each passing day, I was slowly losing it. I was hooked to my phone 24/7. Something dark and unknown was pulling me towards it. "Emma? Emma? What happened to you? Oh my God!" It's been 2 months since I was rescued. Laura has burned both my phone and laptop. I'm slowly recovering, but my therapist says it will take a long time for me to be my former self. I guess I would be better off social media forever. This happened back when I'd been out of the dating game for about a year. I'm a pretty awkward person who doesn't get out much, so my best friend convinced me to try online dating. I thought it was a good idea, so I signed up for OkCupid. I figured I could chat with people for a while, get to know them, and work out who was creepy and who wasn't. Then I could meet the best match. So, I met this guy on the site, and we spent a few weeks chatting and getting to know each other. He seemed really cool and chill, kind of quirky, but not as weird as some of the other guys I'd talked to. When the time felt right, he asked me on a date. By then, I was excited about meeting him, so I said sure, why not? I told the guy that I preferred simple, low-profile dates, so he suggested that I go over to his place. He said he could make us some dinner, and then we could watch some indie horror films, which we both liked. I told my friend about this plan. She had suggested online dating, and we discussed the risks of going to his place instead of meeting in public first. I knew it was risky, but there was the detail of me being 6'2" and him being 5'7". I figured that height difference meant he probably couldn't overpower me if something went wrong. Plus, I'm a sucker for a guy who can cook, so that clouded my judgment a bit. That being said, we developed a code word system that I could use through text or calls. She had all the details of where I was. If things didn't feel right, I could call or text her, drop the emergency code word, and she'd think of a reason for me to leave and come pick me up. Anyway, I arrived at his place, and we went up to his apartment so he could show me around. He started emphasizing his bedroom a little too much, commenting on how his big bed would fit me. I put that down to some awkward, bad taste jokes and got him to move on. Then he took me to the kitchen, where I thought he was about to impress me with his cooking skills. He talked about what a good cook he was and how he was going to wow me. But when it came down to it, he hadn't actually bought anything to cook at all. That was my first red flag. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe he just got nervous and forgot. But as the evening went on, things got even stranger. All he bought for our date was a bottle of red wine, claiming it was super expensive. I made the mistake of showing up on an empty stomach, thinking he was actually going to cook for me. When I found out there wouldn't be any food, I was disappointed and kind of angry. But instead of understanding why I was annoyed, he kept emphasizing the wine, telling me he had spent over $100 on it and that I should be more grateful. Don't get me wrong, I like wine, but I don't know wine. To me, that bottle could have been the rarest in existence or the cheapest from a corner store, and I wouldn't have known the difference. So instead of having dinner, we ended up talking over this bottle of wine. It was pretty good, but not something I'd ever pay hundreds for. The first real red flag I noticed was when it became clear he was trying to get me drunk. Every time I took a sip, he'd ask, "Want a top off?" and pour more wine into my glass. Combined with not making any dinner, I started to feel very uncomfortable. I thought maybe he was just trying to be romantic in a weird way and not actually trying to take advantage of me. So after making him let me eat some chips and toast, I felt steady enough to continue the date. He was also drinking heavily, which I found strange. Usually guys trying to get their date drunk pretend to drink more than they actually do, but he was downing the wine like a champ, so I just slowed my sips until all the wine was gone. Then we headed to the couch to watch some movies. We sat on the couch, and I asked what movie he'd picked for us to watch. He had kept it a surprise all day, teasing me with lines like, "You're gonna love this movie. It's so hardcore, so underrated." I was actually excited to see what he had chosen because we shared a love for indie horror films. But instead of some hidden gem, something interesting, he pulled out a Serbian film. For those who don't know, a Serbian film is billed as the most graphically gruesome and disturbing movie of all time. I felt my stomach turn. This was not the kind of movie you casually watch on a first date, or really ever, in my opinion. I tried to keep my cool and asked, "Are you serious? This movie is really intense." He shrugged and said, "Yeah, I know, but it's a great movie. You have to see it to understand." I was too polite to outright refuse, so I decided to give it a try, hoping it wouldn't be as bad as its reputation. But as the movie started, I felt increasingly sick. The scenes were horrifying and completely inappropriate for a date. I felt trapped, unable to leave without seeming rude or overreacting. The final straw was when he started getting really into the movie, commenting on how cool and real the scenes were. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, grabbed my things and said, "I need to go. This isn't for me." He looked surprised and a bit offended, but he didn't stop me. I left his apartment and called my friend as soon as I was outside, telling her everything. She came to pick me up, and I felt relieved to be out of that situation. Looking back, I realized I had ignored too many red flags. It was a hard lesson learned, but it made me more cautious in the future. I decided to stay off dating apps for a while and focus on meeting people in more traditional ways. It felt safer, and after that night, I needed to feel safe again. I know some people are really into it and can talk for days about all the metaphors, hidden meanings, and theories surrounding it. But personally, I hate it. It's just an increasingly violent mix of gore and adult content that has no value beyond shock. So when he suggested we put it on, I politely asked if he had anything else in mind because I'd already seen a Serbian film and wasn't keen on watching it again. But nope, he insisted we watch it. He noticed I wasn't into it and tried to tell me that the only reason I didn't like it was because I didn't understand it. Right then, I decided this guy wasn't getting a second date. I was mad at how patronizing he was, but I kept my cool and got my phone out to text my friend our emergency code word to end the date. As soon as I got my phone out and started typing, the guy got visibly irritated and said, "Who are you texting?" His tone and attitude once again affirmed why he wouldn't get a second chance, but I stayed calm and replied, "Just letting a friend know I'll be home late tonight." This was part of the plan my friend and I had worked out, and it worked like a charm. The guy thought he was in the clear and calmed down, assuming I was going to stay longer. Then a few minutes later, my friend called, putting on an Oscar-worthy performance, saying there had been a break-in at our apartment. We lived separately. The call volume was loud enough for the guy to hear, and all I had to do was act naturally and sell the bit. My friend then asked if I needed a ride from somewhere, and I told her this guy's whole address, down to the zip code, to make sure he knew someone else knew where I was. I thought I would be out of there in maybe 10 to 15 minutes, but then my friend told me she had to drive her little sister somewhere and was 40-something minutes away. I was livid. It turned out she had to run an errand for her mom, whose car was in the shop, so it was just bad luck rather than her not sticking to the plan. But still, I was horrified to think I had to sit through 40 more minutes of such a gross film with a guy who had gotten weirder and creepier as he'd gotten drunker. For the next 30 minutes, I had to sit through the guy giving me a whole lecture on why a Serbian film is the best indie horror movie since the Blair Witch Project, and that the reason it's so horrible is that it's a mirror reflecting a decaying society, or some nonsense. As the minutes ticked by, increasingly weird and gruesome things happened in the movie. There came a point when something super gross involving a kid happened, and that was the last straw for me. I stood up abruptly, saying, "I can't watch this anymore. I need some fresh air." The guy looked annoyed but didn't stop me. I stepped outside and waited for my friend to arrive, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. Finally, my friend showed up, and I quickly got into her car. I told her everything that had happened, and we both agreed it was a nightmarish experience. I decided to stay off dating apps for a while and focus on meeting people in more traditional ways. It felt safer, and after that night, I needed to feel safe again. I don't want to tell you exactly what happens in the movie, less because of spoilers, and more because it's so disgusting that I don't want to type it out. But it gets to this really bad part of the movie, and the guy next to me starts breathing super heavy and loud through his nostrils. He'd insisted on turning the lights off, which I had agreed to. But now, with the sound of heavy breathing right next to me in a dark room, I was seriously creeped out. I gave my head the tiniest turn, straining my eyes to see what he was doing. I saw him just staring at the screen, the first time he'd been quiet for almost the whole movie. I turned to face him and said, "You good, dude?" He gave this weird little groan of, "Uh-huh," and then scooted closer to me on the couch, so close our hips were touching. I told him, "Whoa there, buddy, way too early for that move." But he just whined again and replied, "Why not?" Thankfully, it was getting close to the time my friend would pick me up, so I used that as an excuse. I said we couldn't start doing anything because I had to leave soon. He saw it the exact opposite way. Because I was leaving soon, he felt entitled to getting a little something. 2 waves of grossness hit me, one after the other. The first was how poorly he timed his move on me, coupled with the actual physical contact. Both made my skin crawl. But the second wave of grossness hit me way harder because I realized what had prompted his move. He'd been staring super intently at some of the grossest, most obscene stuff I'd ever seen on film, and that's what made him want to make out. I cannot overstate how completely creeped out I was. I remember recoiling a little, but then he tried to put his hand on my thigh, and that was it. I was out of there. I didn't care if I had to wait in the street outside. I was not spending another minute in this creepy, handsy guy's dark apartment. I grabbed my purse, stood up and told him, "I'm sorry, I have to go." I marched towards the apartment front door, hoping he wouldn't try to make a scene in the hallway. He followed me to the door, asking, "What's wrong? Did I do something?" I ignored him, my heart pounding. I just wanted to get out of there. When I finally got outside, I called my friend and told her to hurry up. She arrived in about 5 minutes, and I felt such relief getting into her car. I told her everything that had happened, and we both agreed it was a nightmarish experience. From that point on, I decided to stay off dating apps for a while and focus on meeting people in more traditional ways. It felt safer, and after that night, I needed to feel safe again. I learned to trust my instincts and never put myself in a situation like that again. He didn't actually follow me outside, which I'm grateful for, honestly, but what he did next was even more terrifying. Picture me walking down the apartment hallway, almost in total darkness, praying he wouldn't run up behind me. Suddenly, I heard a loud screech. "You're not leaving!" I sprinted for the door, somehow managing to get it open despite panicking that he might have locked it. I bolted downstairs and out of the apartment building. I kept thinking he'd follow me with a knife or a bat, but he didn't. That fear was with me the entire time as I power walked up the street, looking over my shoulder every few seconds to make sure I was still alone. I called my friend and told her to hurry up. Thankfully, she was only a minute or 2 away, so I was out of the neighborhood and finally felt safe. The whole car ride back, I told my friend how a weak start to the date had turned into a total nightmare. She cringed so hard until I got to the part about that scene in the movie and how he reacted to it. That's when she started getting scared for me, apologizing for taking so long to get to me. Obviously, I forgave her. It wasn't her fault that her mom had a car emergency, but I was still pretty shaken up after having to wait there for so long. I ended up blocking the guy's number before he could try to get in touch with me again. But after a few days of thinking about the incident, I decided it wasn't enough to just cut him out of my life. He might not have hurt me that night. He might not even try to. But something told me it was just a matter of time before that guy did something really bad. I know it's not illegal to go on a bad date, and I know this might make me sound like a total Karen, but I ended up calling the cops to tell them what had happened. They agreed that it wasn't illegal to be bad at dating, and I knew trying to pursue anything over his creepy behavior would be pointless. But the cops were cool about it, and said they would keep his name on file just in case anything came up in the future. They actually thanked me for letting them know. That made me feel like I might have actually done something to prevent something really bad from happening in the future. Part of me hopes the cops went over to warn him, but maybe that's just wishful thinking. What I do know is that experience totally put me off online dating for a few years. It wasn't until Bumble came out that I started dipping my toes back into the water. I know I wasn't hurt, and in a world where so many young women's lives are snatched away by violent men, what happened that night still terrified me. I'd never have guessed that the guy was like that from our few weeks of talking online. But the number one thing I learned from it is to always meet in a public place that you know well for a first date, and always have an escape plan.